So as always, the inquiry that I'm always busy with and I like to share has to do with the nature of enlightenment and the nature of enlightened awareness. What is it all about? Very difficult to understand. A lot of people have different ideas about it. Very confusing. So I keep trying to make at least my understanding clear in the hope that it will be helpful to all of you. So I've been thinking a lot in my own daily experience about the difference between realism and idealism. And the reason for that is because the world that we're living in together at the moment is literally on fire in many different ways. And it's a very frightening and confusing, insecure time to be alive. And I'm sure most of us are very aware of this. And are struggling with it existentially, practically, spiritually, metaphysically, philosophically. What's the right relationship to this enormous challenge we're all facing as a global species? And many of the challenges we're facing feel overwhelming, daunting, frightening. Sometimes it's hard in relationship to these challenges that we're all facing. Sometimes it's hard to see the bright side of the picture. It's hard to feel optimistic. And yet the nature of the awakening to enlightened awareness, what's called the ultimate truth or the absolute truth or the highest truth, is understood to be a reference point for a knowing that transcends duality, but is simultaneously recognized and understood to be unequivocally and absolutely positive beyond measure. And so in my own experience, in my own thinking, in my own way of trying to face the challenge of trying to be honest and come to terms with the best I can with the challenges we're facing at a global level, trying to find out what the relationship to all of this is, and trying to align that with my understanding of enlightenment, my experience of enlightenment, my intimate knowing at the highest and deepest level there is a perfection in everything. And I don't want to be casual in the way that I think about these things. I don't want to throw away these distinctions in a way that's just too easy, because these are big, challenging questions. We don't want to be casual about what we think about these things. We want to really struggle with to try to come to a measure of deeper understanding. And I'm in the middle of that process myself, and that's what made me want to talk about these two different perspectives in relationship to spiritual awakening, the awakening to enlightened awareness. Now, when someone is awake, or when we consider someone to be spiritually awake, or even enlightened, at least awake or even enlightened, whatever that may mean, we expect them because they're supposed to be awake and enlightened. We expect them to have cultivated a capacity or a greater capacity to see reality and to see the world around them more clearly than most people. And for example, especially in Buddhism, there's a lot of talk about being able to see things as they are. And when we are introduced to the art and science of meditation, when we try to transcend the conditioning of our mind, and we do begin to wake up to how conditioned we really are, we start to see that a great deal of the time we're not seeing things very clearly. We're seeing what we're seeing much of the time is largely a projection of our own mind. And occasionally, when the mind seems to come into some kind of radical focus, we start to see everything more clearly, with greater intensity, with greater vibrancy. In those moments, we get a glimpse of what it could be like to be awake, to be enlightened, to be able to see things more clearly. And once we get a taste of that, of course, then we want to start doing the spiritual work and the spiritual practice we need to do in order to be able to cultivate that capacity at a greater level so we can have that experience more often. So there's an American Buddhist teacher named Lama Surya Das who has a great line, which I really like. After teaching for many years, he said, "Everybody's crazy." And I've been teaching for many years, and I agree with him. Most of us are pretty crazy. I'm not excluding myself from that category, but I'm just saying that the more one wakes up and the more one learns about the reality and the complexity and the challenge of being human and the reality of the human condition, we start discovering how crazy we all are. But that being said, some of us are more crazy than others. And in this context, I would relate the craziness, the degree of craziness with our capacity to see reality more clearly or not. Some people are so crazy that they live in a world that is completely delusional and made up of the projections of their own unconscious and semi-conscious minds. And other people are so awake that they are aware of a significant degree of their own conditioning and are able to see things much, 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 much more clearly. So there's a relationship between being able to see more clearly, takes a lot of work and a lot of spiritual work, because to see reality more clearly, we have to get our small self, our ego mind, egoic frontal self, our frontal personality, the ego self, out of the way, because our own story, our own personal narrative, the ego story tends to take up too much space in our experience of conscious awareness. We tend to be distracted by our own story and our thinking, our thoughts about our own story, and our feelings about our own story, and this tends to obscure our capacity to see reality directly, free from being overwhelmed by the story of my small self. That's principally what makes it so hard for us to see things as they are. Of course, as I've been saying, it's a matter of conditioning. And the mind and the self are conditioned in so many ways and so many levels. It's impossible to come to terms with all of it. But often we're just seeing the projections of our own conditioned minds. It's largely unconscious. And so how much of the time are we actually seeing what is simply what is a reality as it is, the measure of objectivity, free from being blinded by unconscious conditioning and ego projections. It's a heroic task. It's a huge spiritual task. It's a tremendous spiritual challenge to be able to see clearly. It's not a joke, and very few of us, I think, actually do. But the more one sees clearly, the more powerfully spiritually awake one becomes. And it takes enormous courage and commitment to integrity and honesty, authenticity, truthfulness, to be able to see clearly. It's a beautiful thing in life when you meet an honest person. When you meet somebody who you find over time, or we're getting to know someone over a period of time, long period of time, you get to know that this person is truly honest, and there's a deep authenticity to the nature of the way their soul expresses itself. Because people like this are rare. And it usually takes an enormous amount of spiritual practice and a lot of suffering to get to that point ourselves, when we're able to be authentic and transparent, simple and truthful, real. So another aspect of trying to see things as they are, with realism, has to do with wanting to know the truth. I want to know the truth. Do you really want to know the truth? Most people don't want to know the truth. They want to have a picture of reality that fits in with their own conscious and unconscious fears and desires. it's another thing altogether to want to know what the truth of the way things are actually is on its own terms, free from personal fears, free from personal preferences, free from our own unconscious needs and projections. And I would call that a spiritually mature, it's a spiritually very mature person who first and foremost wants to see reality as it is, no matter what the truth is. They want to see reality on its own terms, no matter what the truth may be. Because they know unless they're seeing the truth on its own terms, they're not seeing reality clearly. And if we don't see reality clearly, we can't have an honest and authentic relationship to reality. And a spiritually mature person wants that. They want to have a mature, honest, truthful relationship with reality as much as possible. That expresses kind of a soul level integrity of our embrace of the challenge of being human. And for some of us, being honest and truthful, being in this kind of integrity with life, with the challenge of being authentic, honest, and truthful and real, means everything to us. So there's a lot of things about life that's very frightening. A lot of aspects of the human experience are very frightening. As I said at the beginning of my talk, we're living in times that are very frightening. Living in a time in history that's very frightening, and it's frightening to even begin to think about the challenges that we're facing. And it takes a lot of courage to think about why it's so frightening, and also to think about why we've ended up in this situation. It's also frightening to see how far astray we could have gone, and why we've ended up in such a disastrous, overwhelmingly challenging situation as a global species. The truth is frightening, and the questions about why this happened and why it's happening are frightening. So to be able to see reality clearly takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of commitment. And yeah, one more thing on the subject. The ego, as you all already know, is not invested in seeing reality clearly. It's invested in being right. And this is a big problem if you want to live an authentically awakened life. So once again, more people than not are more interested in being right about whatever it happens to be than they are in seeing reality as it is. And that's a problem. You can see this clearly in the craziness of the politics we're facing now in the world. And the dynamics at work, the collective dynamics in terms of the nature of mind, how it works collectively, is just frightening. But if we want to be able to see reality as it is, to see reality clearly, we have to cultivate the kind of spiritual maturity that will enable us to be more interested in what's actually true than in our being right about whatever it is. And that takes a lot of courage. Because if we feel that we're right, it makes us feel secure, safe. And if we feel we're not seeing things clearly, or if we discover that we're wrong, God forbid, if we discover that we're wrong, an immature ego can be very frightened by the possibility of being wrong about something important. It can shake up our confidence quite a bit. But a spiritual warrior, someone who's very serious about becoming spiritually mature and awake, is more afraid of delusion than they are of being wrong. I want to know the truth. I want to see things clearly, even if it's very painful and frightening. I want to have a right, an authentic and true relationship with reality, or as much as possible. And this is a daily challenge. So we could say that an awakened person, if we believe they're really awakened, we would expect that one demonstration of that awakening would be an unusual degree to face difficult issues, personal issues for that individual and larger collective issues that we're facing as a global species. But it's this capacity to see things more clearly, to look more courageously, to always be more interested in what the truth is than we are in being right about whatever it is. And finally, how much can we stand in the unknown and not be sure? How much can we bear the insecurity of not knowing if we're right or wrong? How much can we bear the other kind of insecurity? So that's one side of the picture. Um, which in this context I'm calling realism, for lack of a better term. But there's another aspect to all this which is very paradoxical, which has to do with the nature of with awakening. There comes a recognition of what I call the ultimate nature of reality. There's a deep and profound awakening there. There's an awakening to non-duality, or to the ultimate nature of reality. I like to describe it as the ultimate nature of everything that exists and everything that does not exist is something. The ultimate nature of everything that exists and then the ultimate nature of everything that does not exist is something. It's whatever the something is ultimate. It is ultimate. It is absolute. It's non-relative. Whatever the word God means in a traditional context, the metaphysical implications of that word are exactly what I'm pointing to: the ultimate nature of all things as a something, or as an isness. So the greatest realizers throughout history, who have all described their own confrontation with this absolute principle, always describe it as a kind of positivity that is indescribable. Therefore, when you come upon a powerfully spiritually enlightened human being, we expect them to be vibrating with positivity. You don't expect them to be depressed, miserable, frustrated, anxious, confused, lost, or fearful. If they have found the ultimate truth, we expect them to be vibrating with the kind of positivity, the kind of positive vibrations that someone who's found that truth is supposed to be expressing. Because that deep joy and that deep happiness is supposed to be a sign that they have arrived on the yonder shore that the Buddha spoke about. They've made it, and they're established on that yonder shore. And such people do exist. And if you ever have the good fortune to meet someone like that, you'll find that they seem to have access to a source of unreasonable joy and happiness. It seems to have nothing personal about it. That seems to have no personal component to it. Like a deep reservoir of ecstasy and positivity. My own guru, the great H.W.L. Punja, had a remarkable had access to a more remarkable reservoir of overwhelming positivity and joy. I mean, it was literally striking and shocking how overwhelmed with joy he could become at times, and bliss and happiness. So what does that look like? What does it look like to find something so beautiful as a permanent gift from the absolute? What does it look like in human life? What does it mean when you found something that's so beautiful, that's more beautiful than anything relative or anything material could ever be? It always lights up your soul and lights up your mind and lights up your heart, no matter what's happening in the external surroundings that you may be in with, no matter what's happening within the relative circumstances of your personal life. It's discovering an ultimate truth that is so joyous. But when you awaken to it, that joy seems to overwhelm all relative experiences, thoughts, and feelings, because you're discovering a truth by the nature of reality that's just deeper than any kind of relative experience of thought and feeling could ever be. So when this happens, it means one is resting in kind of an inner conviction, an inner experience, an inner vibration of happiness and joy that's causeless, that exists for no reason. It's causeless, it exists for no reason. It just is the ultimate nature of reality, it seems. And when that consciousness, the consciousness of the ultimate nature of all things, comes to the surface of awareness, one becomes overwhelmed by a causeless joy that overwhelms all relative perception, all relative cognition, all relative emotion, gets completely overwhelmed and sidelined by the presence of this overwhelming joy. Now, in the way that I think about this, we don't want to, I'm just expressing an opinion. Most of this is my opinion, but not all of it. Um, we don't want to use this kind of attainment, this kind of glimpse of the absolute and its unconditionally and absolutely ecstatic nature to shield us from coming to terms with reality, the hard truths about reality. But in the way that I approach this, I want us to use our knowledge of the inconceivable goodness that lies at the source of reality to give us access to the kind of courage we need to face difficult things in life, in human experience. If you know it at the ultimate level, there is pure positivity without reason. It simply is what it is. And it can't be understood with the mind, but knowledge of it utterly releases one from fear and doubt and liberates the mind and the soul, absolutely. If you know that to be the case, if you know that to be true, then it makes sense that would be able to give you enormous courage, be a source of courage in order to fight, to face into difficult truths and to fight the good fight. I have the courage to be here in this difficult world space, because I know at the highest level, whatever seems to be happening here, it's ultimately okay. Doesn't mean it's good. I didn't say it was good. I said we know that ultimately it's okay. And that removes a lot of the fear and a lot of the recoil. Of course, we all have to have compassion for our fragile human souls, where there is a lot of fear and insecurity and doubt, no matter how enlightened we may be. So we want to make room for a little bit of insecurity in the midst of all of this. But I'm just making a general point here that, at least in the way that I think about it, the way I try and help people to understand this, the high spiritual attainment, the high spiritual insights, and the high spiritual experiences are not ends in themselves. They're not the destination. They're not the ultimate destination, but they are the means to an end. And the means in this case, the means to give us the kind of what I call spiritual self-confidence in order to live in this world with tremendous courage and fearless spiritual self-confidence and creativity. And even in our best moments, expressions of a kind of bodhisattvic inspired heroism. Because as long as we're here, and I believe I can't prove it, but I'm pretty convinced that we've been here before and we're going to be here coming back again. that we want to realize that we want to, if we can, if we wake up, we want our life here to mean something and to be an expression of something unthinkably positive and noble. We want this life to mean something. You should want your life to mean something, not to just be a process of good days and bad days and kind of meandering around through time and space and psychological and emotional confusion. We want this precious experience of embodied consciousness to mean something. And then it's all worth it. In the end, then it'll all be worth it. And it'll be worth it because we made it worth it. We made the spiritual effort that was necessary for all this, for the challenge of being a conscious human being. It'll be worthwhile. So, building on this idea, on this notion of idealism, spiritual idealism, the way that I'm thinking about it. On one hand, the source of this idealism is the recognition about the ultimate nature of all things. But another expression of this awakened idealism has to do with the way that we think. So, on good days and on bad days, how do you think about the future? Because the way we think about the future, the way you think about the future, the way I think about the future, the way we think about the future, is what ultimately creates that future. So profound expression of this awakened idealism that comes directly from cognition of the highest level of reality has to do with a spontaneous relationship to the future that's inherently positive, which means a vision of the future that is positive. It's not something that you're building with your mind, making effort to build with your mind, but it's something that is just there. In other words, you may be having a difficult time in the present reality of your daily experience. You might find day-to-day, moment-to-moment conscious experience at this particular moment in your life, for whatever reason, emotionally and psychologically and spiritually challenging and difficult and painful and frightening and confusing. For good reason, it could be. But if this happens in a context when your relationship to the future, which is yet to be born, is indestructibly positive. If you're living with a vision, it means you're always living with an awakened, inspired vision of the possible as our destination in the future. I'm personally convinced that all evolutionary bodhisattvas, which is another discussion, are awake to such a vision. It's a vision of the possible, and it doesn't come from the mind alone. It comes from the awakened soul and heart. It comes from consciousness itself directly. It's a vision of the possible that exists in the future. And it's a vision of the possible that is glorious, magnificent, ecstatic, beautiful beyond imagination. It's when all our dreams and everybody's dreams come true beyond any possible measurement. So it's somehow embedded in consciousness already, I believe, and this is true in my experience, and this is true I notice in other people's experience who awaken to the evolutionary impulse, awaken to this bodhisattvic aspiration, suddenly have a different kind of relationship to the future. Because when you awaken to this impulse, the evolutionary impulse, the future always represents the fruition in ways beyond imagination of the promise of the evolutionary impulse. So another expression of this idealism is embracing the paradox that I'm speaking about, which is the reality of your life experience, for whatever reason, for many different reasons, may be very difficult, challenging, frightening, confusing, and even painful or terrible in the present moment. But if you're awake to evolutionary enlightenment, to the evolutionary impulse, you can simultaneously be spontaneously awake and aware of a pulsation and vibration that is calling your attention towards the future. And this impulse will bear fruit, will come to fruition. It means no matter how bad things get for you in the present moment, in the reality of your human experience, you are always metaphysically awake and aware to what's possible in the future in a way that is unimaginably beautiful. Not as this is not as some kind of escape tactic, some form of self-delusion. I'm not talking about escapism or some kind of way we can delude ourselves. I'm speaking about the spontaneous emergence of a certain kind of knowing that comes from awakening to the evolutionary impulse, to the evolutionary currents of the cosmos, which is inherently future-oriented and which is calling us to and promises a positivity that is beyond measure, beyond conception. And so this is something I've been thinking about quite a bit, and it's very interesting because there's a big paradox in everything I'm saying here, as I'm sure you can get by now. And it's possible to hold this paradox in a way that's very powerful. And it takes a lot of spiritual strength to be able to hold these two truths. But one truth is that we're on the Titanic and we've already hit the iceberg. And we're aware that the implications are quite dire for us and a lot of other people. But this can happen in a context where at the same time you're aware of another dimension of reality that is equally real. It's equally real and true. Just becomes more apparent to us and more self-revealing in a metaphysical context, not a physical or material context, but a transcendental metaphysical context. And what I'm trying to say in all of this is that I think we want to become interested in a kind of enlightenment, kind of awakening, kind of transparency that can, a kind of transformation that can hold the dramatic paradox that I'm trying to describe to you transparently and very fully and very powerfully. Because on one hand, if we let in how difficult and dire life can seem at certain points, we can give in to fear and despair and lose hope. We can lose hope. We can give up on caring, which is terrible, which is spiritually, I feel, if I can say such a thing, not permissible. We must never let ourselves get that depressed. But I lost my train of thought. You have to forgive me, but I'm asking all of you if you can bring this into your practice of your daily, hopefully, practice of contemplation, introspection. You can hold these two truths and meditate upon them every day so that you're not afraid of what's painful and frightening and terrible and awful, which is part of what the human experience compels us to face now more than ever. But at the same time, you're aware of the goodness, truth, and beauty and the unimaginable glory of the highest truth that is indestructible, absolutely indestructible, and ultimately more true than anything else. And sometimes this paradox is something we can see very clearly and effortlessly and spontaneously. And other times we have to work to hold this paradox in our consciousness. We never want to get so lost in our fear and our despair that we lose touch with the highest truth, which is indestructible. And we also, at the same time, in order to honor the vulnerability of our shared humanity, we don't want to become so lost in the highest truth, which is positivity that's indestructible, that we lose touch with the truth of suffering, the first noble truth that the Buddha was speaking about. We don't ever want to lose touch with the first noble truth of suffering. Because it's being conscious about the truth of suffering that enables us to awaken to our deeper levels of our humanity and our capacity for compassion and vulnerability. We want to hold all these things in balance. Not an easy thing to do, but it's if we have the courage and the commitment, spiritual commitment, to make the noble effort necessary to hold these paradoxes in balance with each other, we will become powerful and very beautiful awakened human beings, which is the whole point. It's almost like because as a lot of you are already well aware, as we understand the meaning of non-duality, as we get a more mature and deeper understanding of the nature of non-duality, it's nothing to do with escaping to a higher place. It has to do with seeing more deeply into the ultimate nature of all things, relative and absolute. So when you become so conscious that you can bear witness to and become conscious and cognizant of both absolute and relative truth at the same time, and the deeper dimensions of absolute and relative truth at the same time. And your awakening has real depth, meaning, and power to it. And it's not just holding two truths with your mind, but it's spontaneously experiencing both simultaneously as a natural state, which is what I think what we are, what we want to work towards. As I'm talking to all of you tonight, I'm talking to myself also because I'm struggling with all these issues myself in my own life, trying to wrestle with the indestructible glory of the gift that my guru gave me for free almost 40 years ago, and the challenges that we're facing as a global species right now, which I'm reading a lot about, and I'm taking it very personally, as I think we all should be. And I can feel myself being pulled in two directions at the same time, and I'm trying to come to terms with all of it. So this is I'm speaking from my own contemplations. But I think that finally, I mean, I just really said what I intended to say, but it's this capacity to bear, to awaken to the highest levels of absolute truth. At the same time as being aware of some of the more challenging dimensions of relative truth and relative reality at the same time, and holding those two truths together, not recoiling, not separating one from the other, but being able to see and feel both with an open heart and an open mind, very vulnerably, and in a place where you're not defending yourself from how glorious the ultimate truth is and how terrible the relative truth can be at the same time. And you're not trying to protect yourself or defend yourself from any of it. But allow yourself to be at one with all of it. I think it's very much what the enlightenment that we need to address desperately is all about at this particular time, especially. It's neither one or the other, it's both. So realism and idealism. So we want to work on both every day. Realism is making the effort to see reality as it is. Realism is making the spiritual and cognitive, emotional, philosophical, metaphysical effort to see reality as it is, not as you want it to be, or as you desire it to be. But can you make that effort, that spiritual effort to see reality as it is, even when it's difficult and painful? And at the same time, are you making the spiritual effort that needs to be made, or surrender, however you want to put it, necessary to have access to the highest truth, which is the glory of God? Can you experience that highest level of reality on its own terms, free from your own thoughts about it? Can you fly way beyond your own mind and allow yourself to drown in the absolute nature of reality that can't be confined in any dualistic world space? Can we work on both of these truths at the same time? Because to be authentically awake, especially this time in history, we need to be masters of both, which will require enormous commitment and dedication. So, so maybe for the next few days after you meditate in the morning, you should ask yourself before you start your day, you can make a chart and say one side, on one side you can have, on one side of the paper you can have idealism, and the other side you can have realism. And then you can ask yourself how you're doing in each category that particular day, just to keep up with yourself. Are you being true to your, are you being true to reality as it is? Are you seeing things clearly, as clearly as you possibly can in relationship to your own personal life circumstances and in relationship to the world situation we're all in, which is quite overwhelming? Are you doing your best to face it? And at the same time, you want to find out, are you awake to the glory of God in every moment, every day? And if you are awake to the glory of God, you want to ask, I say, what does it actually mean? What does it look like? Because you remember, as I was saying earlier, those individuals who are truly awake to the glory of God have access to a kind of joy, spiritual self-confidence that's infectious and vibrates with transcendental love and freedom, freedom, freedom. We don't want to forget about that. So we don't want to compromise on the idealism. We don't want to compromise on the realism. That's serious practice. I've noticed a long time ago that a lot of people, and for reasons that I'll never understand, want to compromise on the idealism. I say, why would you want to compromise on the idealism? What are you holding back for? Why don't you want to be happy? Don't you want to be happy? Don't you want to be unbelievably, overwhelmingly happy? Don't you want to soar to the highest heights of liberation and self-actualization, transcendental truth? Don't you want to fly all the way to heaven, if such a thing were possible? Why do you resist? And in the same way, uh, too many of us are always resisting our own, coming to terms with our own self-destructive impulses. We resist sometimes we see, oh, I see places where I'm stuck, places where I'm holding back, places where I'm resisting, facing the truth about my own self, my own limitations. And if you realize these limitations have to be faced, but you refuse to do it, the longer you refuse, we just continue to create karma. Karma continues to get created. So avoiding anything that needs to be faced just never pays off in the long run. We just make things worse for ourselves. So the question is, don't do that. Living the spiritual life in earnest is easy when it's easy, and it's hard when it's hard. And you never know what's going to happen. But we can show up and we can be prepared to fight the good fight with everything we've got. And I believe if we're playing for keeps, God will love us for that, whatever that means. Very good. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer if I can.
So if you have any questions, please write them into the chat box of Zoom at the bottom of your screen.
There's a little sign on the computer that says, Max would like to control your camera. Approve or decline.
Why would Max want to do that? I think that's okay, Andrew. He probably pressed somewhere. But if you have a question, please write it in the chat box.
Yeah, in the meantime, I was honestly thinking, this is honest advice for everybody to just simply take a sheet of paper, put a line down the middle, and just put idealism on one side and realism on the other. Just check it every day. And just check every day in terms of how you think you're doing in relationship to both options. It'll keep you in the game. It'll help you to remember what it would be like to live a big and very conscious life.
I have a first question, Andrew, from Pramod.
Okay.
He says, it seems it requires being aware with great clarity and spiritual strength to be unfailingly idealistic and realistic, which seems to bring a dynamism. How is this linked to freedom? Is our inner freedom supported by this idealistic and realistic position?
Yes, yes, and yes. That's my answer. Yes, yes, and yes. That's why I gave the talk, of course. Yes, yes, and yes. Good question, and the answer is already there.
The next question is from Imelda. She is asking, how would you see your intersubjective processes and practices helpful in today's world around the issue you have talked about?
I think having the experience of coming together with other sentient beings, other human beings, in a context of ego transcending vulnerability and authenticity can renew one's faith in human nature. So once again, if you can come together with other human beings in a state of absolute undefended vulnerability, transparency, authenticity, brotherhood and sisterhood, in a way that truly transcends the relative ego and the relative confines of the material world, and you experience that kind of expansion of consciousness and mutuality and awakened love. It's very inspiring about human nature. It gives us a lot of confidence in our potential as human beings to be good, true, and beautiful with each other, and to give rise to something that's greater than any of us individually. We can learn how to work together in the context of spiritual idealism. So having those kinds of experiences on a regular basis renews one's faith in humanity, which these days is desperately needed, I think. We need to have faith in each other. In other words, it's one thing for me to have faith in myself. One thing for any of us to have faith in ourselves personally, but do we have faith in others? Do we believe in each other? Do we believe in each other? So if you can have experiences on a regular basis where you find other people are actually worthy of trust, that you can show up and be trustworthy, and someone else can show up and be trustworthy, and you can everybody can do what they need to do to love each other in the deepest and highest way. This is very spiritually rewarding, but most of all, it gives us faith in human potential, in our evolutionary potential. Because if you can do spiritual work together in a context where you actually feel everybody is experiencing a high state of consciousness together, you start to see people actually changing and evolving and becoming more beautiful. You start realizing, oh my God, it's possible to change. I see so and so's changing, you start changing. And we get faith. This gives us faith in human nature, faith in our own capacity to evolve, faith in other people's capacity to evolve. And I mean, that's very important, faith in each other. I love you, but you have faith in me. You love me, but do I have faith in you? If I love you, but I don't have faith in you, it's not the same as I love you and I have faith in you. Having faith in each other is so spiritually empowering. And it's spiritually empowering not just personally, but at a deeper level. So it's having faith in humanity. So that's what these kind of collective practices, if they're pursued seriously and in earnest, can give us faith in the realization and actualization of higher spiritual human potential. And that's very important, believing that it's possible for people to change, to awaken, and to become enlightened together, and to experience trust and faith in each other. Because what's so painful in life is when we have trust and faith in each other or in someone, and then they disappoint us, and we start to lose faith. The trust is a very big deal. So these kinds of practices, if they're pursued in earnest over a long period of time, can become a source of enormous faith in human potential. And if we then, and then if we succeed in this kind of work, if the collective wakes up, stays awake, and continues to evolve, develop, and mature, and cohere, you feel like you're building something in consciousness together. You're building a spiritual and metaphysical capacity for higher consciousness and higher cognition. It means something very beautiful about what's possible in consciousness itself. And all of this gives us more access to spiritual self-confidence. So yes, it's a big deal.
Thank you.
Yeah, the worst thing right now is that so many people feel so alone, lonely, isolated, depressed. Why is that funny? I don't know why that's funny, but I just laughed. I don't know why. But having faith in each other, that's a big part of spiritual life. I not only love you, but I have faith in. It's much easier to love somebody than to have faith in them. But if I have faith in you, see, it's easier to love just to love somebody. But if you have faith in somebody, then they can hurt you. Not that they would want to hurt you, but if you have faith in somebody, you're opening up your heart to them. And it takes an enormous amount of courage. So you can loving somebody is one thing, but having faith in them is another. And I think if we're going to live a powerfully awakened spiritual life, would be one in which we have faith in each other. But it's not. But it has to be a faith that's actually earned. It's not. You can't just say, "Well, I have faith in you." It's not something you can give somebody for free. Having faith in other people has to be earned, and it takes time. But if you have faith in someone, then they can hurt you. If they have faith in you, you can hurt them. So that's much more challenging than just loving somebody. But hopefully all of the spiritual work that we're doing, if it's genuine and real, should ideally, if it's real, it should create cultures of faith. Awaken spiritual cultures where people have enormous faith in each other. And it's faith that's been earned and is being earned every day. Then we're building something of the greatest value between us, which is faith in each other, faith in the best parts of human nature in each other. And if we can give birth to the best parts of human nature in each other as a result of our spiritual practice, that's beautiful. That makes it all worth it.
We don't have more questions, Andrew.
So we want to be so beautiful in the way that we live our lives, that we inspire people to have faith in us. How's that for something positive to aim for? We want to all get to the point where we want our example to be so inspiring that people will start to have faith in us, faith in the best part of us. I have faith in the best part of you, Andrew. I have faith in the best part of you. I have faith in the best part of you. And if you have faith in the best part of me, and I have faith in the best part of you, we are opening our hearts to each other in a way that, as I was explaining before, makes us very vulnerable. I'm just repeating the thought, but I think it's important to understand it. That's what a real spiritual connection is all about. And that's what it feels like. Vulnerable and deep and exposed and exquisite and deeply beautiful and very meaningful. We want our relationships to become inherently meaningful, because they're expressing all of this awakened consciousness and inspired spiritual intentionality. That's a whole other story. That's beautiful.